comes to video game companies of ill repute, particularly those of a certain vintage, one name always tends to stick out from the rest of the pack, that being LJN. The horrors they cast down onto an unsuspecting public have become legendary, particularly their games from the NES era, and thanks to YouTube they've been documented quite extensively. Hell, if you'll pardon a quick shout out, there even exists a cool series of videos by fellow YouTube reviewer Cygnus Destroyer dedicated to trying to defend the games made by LJN. But there's one that I've never really looked at, even though for me and for my era, they're pretty much the first name that comes to mind when it comes to trashy video game publishers like these. I speak, of course, of Acclaim. What LJN were to the 8-bit era, Acclaim undoubtedly were to the 16-bit era. They were big, they were loud, they were stupid, and ultimately they faded away. It's time to give them some time in the spotlight. Now, Acclaim put their name on a lot of games, and it would be a rather big task to cover all of them. They hit the ground running with games like Rambo, and ended up catching some pretty big licenses. You know the Simpsons Top 10 vid I put out again just a little while back? Most of those games have Acclaim's stamp all over them. They also published the first ever WWF wrestling game, the craptaculous WWF WrestleMania, and they'd have a solid relationship for years to come. A short and violent war, well probably not but anyway, was waged between LJN and Acclaim, the two kingpins of crap, with masses of disappointed children already behind them, fighting tooth and nail until, in the end, Acclaim bought LJN for themselves in 1990. They would continue to be stonkingly successful in the 16-bit era. Funny thing being that actually, depending on the luck of the draw, an Acclaim game could actually be quite good from time to time. Alien Free, anyone? That tremendous, underrated and scary as hell Mega Drive actioner? It's an Acclaim title. So is the awesome and wholly underrated Mega Drive top-down shooter Predator 2. They were often in charge of porting Midway's arcade titles, the result being some great home versions of Mortal Kombat, NBA Jam, and WWF WrestleMania the arcade game. Hell, their name is on a few games that have a bit of cred, whether it's most of the Turok games or even the first two Burnout games. Still though, there's also Batman Forever, the horrible 32-bit era South Park games, WWF In Your House, BMX XXX, a game so hideous and so grotesque that it destroyed their partnership with BMX legend Dave Mirra in a single blow. Acclaim wasn't always a surefire sign of total crap inside, but that just made it all the more dangerous. Acclaim games, well, they're like a box of chocolates, with L's to be precise. And of course there were the ridiculous, craven attempts at publicity that were almost tailor-made for the overtly extreme WWF and Jerry Springer watching trailer park trash that Acclaim thought their audience mostly consisted of. Most of these ideas were the brainchild of their top executive, former Journey sinner, and actually no he wasn't, he was just a business dude, Steve Perry, responsible for such brilliant ideas as offering the prize of £10,000 to any expecting couple who'd be willing to name their newborn baby Turok. Oh, and even better than that, they made efforts to try and purchase advertising space for Showdown 2 on frickin' headstones. Business decisions like this may create controversy, they may be ridiculously bold and brash, and yes, they may well make people think that something's smelling kind of foul here. And they'd be right. Around the start of the 21st century, the wheels were kinda starting to fall off Acclaim a little. There was the shock of losing their biggest and most treasured license. The WWF, after years of crappy Acclaim games that looked like a bad joke compared to the games that WCW got, made the decision to switch over to THQ in 1999. And yes, it was reportedly entirely based on how much people hated Acclaim's WWF games. And so the main subject of this video is how Acclaim went through their final years looking for a replacement for their big old moneymaker. And that just so happens to take us back to wrestling games again. Oh yes. Acclaim's first port of call was to go extreme, but we kinda covered that already. ECW Hardcore Revolution and Anarchy Wars for the PS1 were unbelievably shitty low-effort versions of the Attitude and Warzone games that the WWF had had. They looked comical compared to the WWF's sleek and oh-so-new SmackDown titles. And to be honest, it wasn't long before that was all irrelevant anyway. The WWF bought both WCW and ECW in 2001, meaning that there wouldn't be any more games by either of those because they didn't actually exist anymore. So what to do in such a situation then if you're Acclaim? The biggest wrestling game in town is now the only game, and they don't want you on your team. So in order to try and get that money back, Acclaim came up with, well, a sort of hybrid. Something that no doubt seemed like a good idea. In fact, it bloody well was. Something that would certainly be injected with a passion for the subject matter. Something that would, of course, be utterly poleaxed by terrible execution. They came up with Legends of Wrestling. Now, if there's one show that lives on in absolute infamy in the wrestling world, it's a 1999 pay-per-view called Heroes of Wrestling. It's delivered horrid presentation, comical production, a bunch of overweight, out-of-shape, hand-sucking has-beens waddling around the ring, and a main event that featured the unedifying sight of an absolutely ripped Jake Roberts, meaning drugs not dealt, feeling up his breasts, staggering around everywhere, and jerking off his slank. It is without question the worst show ever, the Star Wars Holiday Special of Supercards.
You want to play 21? I got 22. You want to play blackjack? I got 2 of those too.
Why bring it up? Well, it's an extreme example of what the reality of something like Legends of Wrestling could entail. But surely Legends of Wrestling wouldn't have these problems. It was a video game after all. No need to use the 50-year-old veteran with fucked knees and a crack habit, you can use them in their prime. And if the WWF's recent taking over of the business meant one thing, it was that a lot of big names weren't on any kind of exclusivity deal, at least not yet. Even without the WWF, Acclaim were able to assemble a perfectly good roster. Jerry Lawler, Terry Funk, Jimmy Snuka, the Road Warriors, the Iron Sheik, Bret Hart, and biggest of all, the immortal Hulk Hogan. The roster could definitely sell a game, and yes, it was a bloody good idea, with a lot of goodwill behind it. So many people wanted Legends of Wrestling to succeed, not just because it was an alternative when it didn't look like there was going to be any alternatives anymore, but because the idea of playing a video game with all of these legends from the past was brilliant. I mean, think of all the dream matches. So exactly what happened to make it one of the flat-out worst wrestling games of all time? After the usual opening video bumflufferys and picking from a fine roster that not only includes the big names I've already mentioned, but also a fair few damn fine curios on the undercard, the likes of Dynamite Kid, Rick Martel, Brian Pillman, the Von Erich family, plus the addition of Rob Van Dam and Sabu, because hell, why not? The disappointment hits hard as soon as you get into the arena. Think of the glorious spectacle that is a Hulk Hogan entrance. And then here you get this. The Hulkster enters the ring like he's Salvatore fucking Bellomo. There isn't even an attempt to make a sound-alike version of his theme. How do you not do that? I mean, if you have the Orange Goblin on board, then surely Jimmy frickin' Hart's going to be sitting right there. As it turns out, you're actually in control somewhat during entrances, in that you can do your wrestlers' 2 taunts anytime you want. It still just looks really stupid though. Most people actually do have Jimmy Hart versions of their entrance themes, although weirdly not the Hulkster. Yeah. When you get into a match you notice other things like everybody's weird proportions, very top heavy. This is a conscious and actually fairly nice touch. The wrestlers are built with old action figures in mind as opposed to trying to perfectly emulate their realistic size and bulk, and that comes off quite well. Trouble is they also move like action figures too. Beaten up old LJN ones. This game is just so stiff. You can barely even throw a punch properly. It feels like there's a second's delay on every strike. When the wrestlers lock up, you get a bunch of options. Suplex position, belly to belly, scoop slam or standing head scissors. And from these you can pull off a few moves and in the main get to grips with the game's chain reversal system. You can use timing bars to reverse out of these positions and go into another, and you can even use these bars to add a bit of oomph to other moves. For example, if you pull off a Northern Lights suplex, you can use the timing bar to bridge it into a pinfall. In theory, it's a fantastic idea. In practice, it moves so damn slow, just like everything else, that it becomes tedious as all hell. It doesn't help that the moves themselves just feel so limited. There's really not much here, and what there is has virtually zero impact. One of the main issues with this game is that you never feel like you're doing anything except slowly grinding out victories. You could pick the fastest guys in the game and the match would still feel like a slog on the planet's mud. Even the cruiserweights wrestle basically just the same as the heavyweights. And hell, speaking of movesets, this is supposed to be an old school wrestling game, isn't it? So why exactly are the movesets for each character so ridiculous? Look, here's Kevin Von Erich hitting a frickin' pedigree. Here's that famously old school move, the Moneymaker. Oh, what about the Cradle Pile Driver? And so many other examples. Absolutely no care has gone into creating the moveset for each wrestler. Sure, each wrestler has their finisher, if you can pull that off, and good luck with that, but you can forget about even having so much as a signature move. If I'm playing as Bret Hart, where on earth is a side backbreaker, or a Russian leg sweep, or anything like that at all? Nowhere to be found. You get a couple here and there. I mean, yes, Hulk has his big boot, and Rob Van Dam even gets his Rolling Thunder, well, so long as other people aren't doing it. But yeah, the moveset is a total joke on every front, and just makes it even more of a laughable recreation of what's supposed to be old school wrestling. Match types are so thin on the ground too, nothing except singles, 3 or 4 way dancers and tag bouts, no special stipulations, and hell, no DQ or count out at all. You can just go out the ring, grab weapons and wail away with impunity. It doesn't help that whenever you've got 4 or more models out there, the action absolutely slows to a freaking crawl. I mean, yes, this game can actually get even slower. This just makes the whole thing come off as very badly made indeed. The big career mode is also totally bare bones. All you have to do is increase your popularity in each territory and you win. It adds a match excitement factor to bouts that at least adds an incentive to make the action as varied as possible, but there's barely any difference between this and regular bouts aside from the odd segment with your manager, in this case Jimmy Hart. The creator wrestler is also a joke. Seriously, your CAW basically has one face. And look at all the disgusting shit that you can put on them. How low quality is that? Seriously, it looks like... well, hell. It was while fiddling around with the CAW that I came to a grim realisation about this whole shit show. Bluntly put, this game, it's a barely upgraded version of what still is the WWF Attitude Warzone engine. They didn't even bother to change stuff like this. You can put these exact same things on your Attitude CAWs. Suddenly you notice how many of those weak animations look familiar, because they were in those old PS1 games. You notice how the AI is basically the same as it was in those games too. Why do they always do that stupid looking punch when they get up? Well, because that's what they did in Attitude. Why do the wrestlers constantly randomly fall down in multi-man matches whenever they're touched? Because that's what they did in Attitude, and Warzone, and the frickin' ECW games. The energy bar system switching from green to red? It's the exact frickin' same. I mean, don't get me wrong, I loved Attitude back in 1999. I would play it for hours. But it was already horribly lacking compared to WCW's N64 games, and as soon as the first SmackDown game came out, it was immediately and totally obsolete. By this stage of the game, it's ancient freaking history. This is the story of Legends of Wrestling right here. They had good faith behind them, an awesome roster, and people wanting to make a damn good wrestling game. Acclaim fucked it up because they were cheap. They cared not a jot for any of the actual detail, for the most part because they're still using an engine complete with all the animations that was over 4 years old by this point, and all that they really changed was barely upping the quality of those models to make it look like something resembling what a PS2 standard game should be, and changing the controls so at least you didn't have to pause and look at the move list to find the 4-button combo for any freaking move that was more powerful than a standard hip toss. No wonder why everyone seems to do frickin' pedigrees, TKOs and the like. This is all the shit that was in the old games and they couldn't be asked to make anything new or even change what was already there. You may not find a more blatant example from the early PS2 days of patching up absolutely ancient code and sticking it out there for the world to see. It's laziness, it's cutting corners, it's video game cowboys at their finest. It's awful. At the time I couldn't cut it any slack whatsoever, despite how much I absolutely wanted to love it. And this is the same bitch who played fucking WCW Thunder for many hours, deluding myself into thinking that it was all worth it. It was horrible then, and it's even worse now. Legends of Wrestling? Bloody Heroes of Wrestling, more like. Whew, it's not often that I get to utterly eviscerate a game like that, but we've got to move on. Needless to say, there's nowhere to go but up. Despite the first horror show, Legends of Wrestling would continue, and it had continued pretty damn sharpish, with Legends of Wrestling 2 hitting the shelves the very next year. Is anything going to redeem it? Because it may well promise even more legends, even more modes and the like, but it's going to need a damn sight more than that to not join those oh so terrifying ranks of the damned. Still, it does provide roster improvements at least. The roster for this game is bigger than ever, with just about everyone who was in the first game and then some. Lots of really cool additions like Bam Bam Bigelow, Scott Steiner, Sid Vicious, Eddie Guerrero, and the big addition of Andre the Frickin' Giant to boot. Being British, I have the special European version of this game, which actually includes 4 proper World of Sport British legends. Yes, you can finally recreate Big Daddy vs Giant Haystacks in a video game, even if Big Daddy does the Sabu taunt for some reason. There's a couple of new modes too, ladder and cage matches, an up to 30-man battle royal, and proper Survivor Series style 8-man tag bouts. So at the very least there's been a lot of additions. The sequel doesn't take anything away. Still, the action is what really needs to improve. Getting into the win, the first thing that can be said is that the wrestlers do at least have proper entrances now. This isn't SmackDown level presentation, but it isn't terrible. Announcing the guys in the win has been dropped, which speeds things up a bit. Indeed, speed is basically the name of the game. This game moves a lot faster than the original, thankfully. Yes, it is still basically the same engine, and yes, that should be considered something of a crime. Simply upping the speed to unnatural levels is a quick and dirty fix, but this is a low budget game and perhaps there should be some slack here. Upping the speed means that the game's timing based chain wrestling system, which was by far the best thing about the original's gameplay, actually gets the chance to shine now that there's a lot of tempo behind it. The graphics aren't much better than the original, but there's much better use of lighting and whatnot. Of course, the animations haven't really changed at all, and upping the speed doesn't help them out, but at least the game feels a bit more playable now. Is it great or even good? Perhaps not, but it's quick and can be fun to mess around with, especially as the AI is going to give you a bit more of a fight. It feels a bit smarter this time, not constantly repeating the same moves as it did in the first game, and the result can actually be some fine back and forth battles. So yeah, maybe things are looking up, just a little. Other areas have improved a little too. The career mode, for example, is a lot better. It's still the same deal as the original at its core, but you now get storylines added to the mix. Nothing major, normally just an indication that you're going to have a rival in the territory and they're going to feud with you, but enough to keep it all going. The addition of more extended cutscenes with promoters is also a good thing, as well as the addition of a whole bunch of jobbers to beat up on. It gives you a sort of feeling that you're actually a part of an organisation instead of basically doing a series of glorified exhibition matches. You also get a whole load of unlockables, from hidden wrestlers to concept art, and even the chance to watch a whole bunch of interviews with any in-game wrestler that they could get. If you feel the need to watch the Hulkster go through his usual lies and exaggerations, you can do so. Or perhaps you'd rather go for George Steele instead. I know I would. There's plenty of others dotted around and it's a nice little touch. It feels as though this time they actually cared more about the product and the subject matter. Don't get me wrong, Legends of Wrestling 2 is still fraught with issues. The lack of much in the way of new animations means that yes, the movesets are still pretty damn shitty, with almost everyone having at least one comically out of place ECW type move. The soundtrack is full of the absolute worst possible early noughties butt rock imaginable, including the grand nadir of absolutely everything Superstar by Saliva, although at least you can turn this shit off if you want. It's still not the best coded game, and it will slow up considerably when you get more than 4 or 5 people in a match. And although I got quite lucky while capturing the game here, this game has been known to seriously misbehave. Half the time I've loaded the game up it's either crashed at some point or glitched out hilariously, and you do get quite a few minor bugs as well. Upping the speed may be a quick fix, but it certainly decreases the game's stability, and it wasn't exactly solid to begin with. On the whole, what you get here is a pretty damn average game, perhaps even a bad one. But it's not horrendous, far from it. And if you're a fan of the subject matter, if you really want a game with a whole load of legends and you're willing to cut the game a fair bit of slack, then perhaps it'll work out well for you. I can go either way with this one. Sometimes I have fun, sometimes the crashes and glitches get so bad that I wonder why I bothered. This time it was the former. At the very least it's a massive improvement over the original, and maybe, after such a terrible start, the series could well have had a bit of potential. The question to ask at this point though, was Legends of Wrestling filling that big WWE-sized hole for Acclaim? The answer, bluntly put, was no. The hits just weren't really coming anymore. At At this stage, most of Acclaim's titles were kind of low-budget affairs. Extreme sports stuff, some licensed gubbins, the sort of thing they'd always produced, but it wasn't really working out in the PS2 era, when people expected a whole lot better. They never really tried anything new, and were instead continuing to pump out games in genres that were pretty damn packed and had long since passed them by. Who'd want to play a Dave Mirra game anyway when Tony Hawk is right there, you know? Acclaim was stagnant, thoroughly mid-table, and it was starting to wear them down. Still, Legends of Wrestling would continue to plough on. It took a while, but Showdown Legends of Wrestling, the third game in the series, would hit the shelves in June of 2004. And perhaps things were a little bit brighter this time. The second game had actually showed a bit of potential. Maybe this series actually could rise up and produce something good. Showdown Legends of Wrestling, before you get into the win, feels like an awesome step up. The roster is amazing. Seriously, there are so many legends. Alongside just about everyone else from the first two games, you've now got the Ultimate Warrior, Sting, Randy Savage, Dusty Rhodes, Owen Hart, DDP, Rick Rude, Kurt Hennig, Jake frickin' Roberts, and more. So much choice, over 70 wrestlers right out of the box. That's pretty exciting. The presentation too just feels like a step up. Proper real life arenas, Madison Square Garden, Boston Gardens, Mid-South Coliseum, Pontiac Silverdome. Big main event feel, big entrances, more detailed models than ever, just full of pizzazz. I mean, holy shit, Legends of Wrestling is finally here. And then you get in the win. And, well, it's sad. I almost feel bad for what I'm about to do here, because of how frustrating this all is. I mean, Christ, the game has gone backwards. Look, it's still the same engine from the last two games at the end of the day, but even the good things that they did, that chain reversal system, it seems to be virtually gone. Totally in the background, no indications as to how you'd even use it. So everything ends up being hitting a move, hitting another move, over and over and over. And what happened to the AI? Why is it suddenly so basic and passive again? The second game could actually give you a proper fight. In this game, all I've got to do is keep on them and I'll come out of matches with barely a scratch. I've probably said this before and I'll say it again, but you shouldn't have to actually work matches in order to have good matches in wrestling games. It destroys the suspension of disbelief. There's now the addition of commentary with the old WCW team of Tony Schiavone, Larry Zbyszko and Bobby the Brain Heenan. And it's horrendous. Worse than and amazingly even more stilted than WCW Thunder, with a terrible mix that boosts Tony while sticking the others below a whisper, and, well, holy shit. I have never heard anyone give less of a shit about doing something than the Brain does here. I really haven't. And I can hardly blame him either.
Wow!
The backsteps continue throughout the whole thing. Even if some changes are welcome, such as it being much easier to pull off finishers now, in-ring action just feels like a slow, boring grind where you have little option except to hit the same moves again and again and again until finally you win. And the movesets are still, as usual, annoying and stupid. There's more signatures and quite a few animations have actually been added or rejigged, but it doesn't feel anywhere near close to right. And the game still slows right down in multi-man matches and the like, only now it becomes incredibly blurry too. The whole thing becomes hard to even see when it slows down, which is just unforgivable. The career mode has been chopped almost totally, despite all the progression that the second game made on that front. Now it literally feels like something out of the old 16-bit WWF games, with barely a hint of storyline to get you through. Even the match excitement stuff has been dropped. There is the option to recreate scenarios from classic matches, which is an okay enough touch I guess, but it doesn't really come with much in the way of ceremony or anything, short of a little text before basically sticking you slap bang in the middle of a bout. Those who are disappointed that I didn't mention anything about the CAW in Legends of Wrestling 2 will note here that it's barely changed from the first game, still chock full of assets from WWF Attitude and the like, which is great if I so happen to want to recreate my former 10-time WWF champion Chris Kanyon CAW, but it sure as hell isn't good for anything else. Showdown is just, oh my god, it's maddening. Legends of Wrestling 2 put the series on the road towards being good. Seriously, it was rising like a phoenix. Okay, well maybe not a phoenix, but it was making progress. It just needed some tweaks here and there. Showdown does those tweaks, but it does them on all the things that the second game was good at, thus creating a very boring and simplistic wrestling game that looks great, but is just no fun to play at all no matter how hard you try. And believe me, I tried because I wanted this game to be a smash. Any game that has Jake Roberts in it should be a smash virtually by default, but this isn't. And no, it wasn't much of an alternative to SmackDown at all. Throughout all of this time, WWE SmackDown was still thoroughly unaffected by Legends of Wrestling. But, maybe just one game more. One that took the pizzazz and presentation of Showdown and actually brought back the depth and seesaw battles of the second game. Maybe, just maybe, that would do it. But alas, Acclaim were locked up in a sharpshooter, and a guy from Debtor's Court was telling the referee to ring the fucking bell. Showdown Legends of Wrestling is the last game in the series. In fact, it would be the last game that Acclaim Entertainment would ever publish. Just 3 months after the game's release, in September of 2004, Acclaim filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. There would sure as hell be no 10-bell salute to greet their demise. Maybe Legends of Wrestling never stood a chance in any case. One crucial thing to note is that in 2003, the SmackDown series did what was perhaps inevitable, and with perhaps the greatest iteration in the history of the series, Here Comes the Pain, they started introducing WWE Legends into the mix. It may have only been a few at first, but the writing was on the wall. Why struggle with Legends of Wrestling when SmackDown's happy to provide the likes of the Legion of Doom, Andre the Giant and Roddy Piper? THQ and Ukes would kick on from there, adding more and more Legends with each SmackDown title, and even producing an all-Legends game of their own, WWE Legends of WrestleMania. Nowadays, the recreation of eras such as the Monday Night Wars or of classic WrestleMania moments have become one of the major selling points for the WWE series of games. With this simple little move, SmackDown basically cashed Legends of Wrestling out of the market. No matter what, it wouldn't have been able to compete with the biggest series in town pissing directly on their turf. So perhaps there's no way this video could have had a happy finish. Legends of Wrestling ultimately goes down as a pretty rubbish series of games, with the second one undoubtedly being the best of the three, and the others not really worth anything at all. Hell, it's pretty questionable as to whether the second one is worth or not unless you're a big old school wrestling fan. There is actually also a Legends of Wrestling game for the GBA as well, but it basically plays like the really frickin' old WWF Royal Rumble war games and the like, and it looks pretty damn rubbish. Not worth much in the way of coverage in all honesty. The epilogue of the whole thing was that the Acclaim name was acquired by Howard Marks, former CEO of Activision, who formed a company called Acclaim Games that exclusively dealt in Western versions of free-to-play online MMOs from Asia. The Acclaim library was purchased by Throwback Entertainment in 2006, who have basically done fuck all with any of it, but do plan to re-release the ancient Gladiator Sword of Vengeance for the Xbox One at some point this year. And in 2010, Acclaim Games shut down too, thus bringing an end to the whole lineage. The end. So it could well be said that there was very little of anything worthy in this video at all. We have covered a middling, largely forgotten and quite rightly so series of cheap old wrestling games. But I thought it interesting in a way, seeing as Legends of Wrestling is a good illustration of the fall of a company that was once a pretty freaking big name but ultimately faded into history. Acclaim was successful in the 90s and were undone by a reluctance to ever recognise that the 90s has ended. They continued to resolutely believe that what used to work, the fast and cheap pumping out of wrestling games, extreme sports, licensed games, mediocre sports games, would work again, even though the scene was totally different. Acclaim didn't move with the times at any point. Any of the good parts of Legends of Wrestling most likely existed in spite of the company's main aims, and ultimately it wasn't enough to either make the series successful or bring the company back from the brink. And hey, looking back at the fall of a company is as good a reason to make a video as any other. In the end, wrestling fans always say that they would love a game that's just packed full of nothing but legends and old-timers, but no game that's tried has managed to satisfy anyone yet. Hell, maybe it isn't such a good idea after all. And all things considered, it's not likely that anyone else out there is going to attempt anything along the same lines aside from 2K and Ukes. So, hooray for that, I suppose. Hey ho, time for me to sign off, I guess. I've been Kim Justice and it's still real to me, damn it!